Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is September 14th, 2015. I want to welcome you all to the show and remind you that the show is being the show is being recorded on September the 13th, so a day prior. So bear that in mind as we talk about current events and how things can change in the period of 24 hours. But hopefully we'll be able to stay on topic and still have something relevant to say. I'm confident that we will. Now, for those of you who are just joining us tonight for the first time, I would like to remind you that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at UCY.TV. The show is being rebroadcast every night at UCY. You can check the show's schedules for the broadcast over at UCY.TV, and you can find the schedule page, click on the day, and you'll see the time. But it's being rebroadcast 7 nights a week, and we are also being rebroadcast on Reality Bites Radio as well. And you can check that website for the schedules there. But if you want to catch the show when it's broadcast for the first time, again, Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, UCY.TV. And if you want to access the show's personal webpage at UCY, it's UCY.TV/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And you'll find the links to my recent articles there, the archive versions of this show, and the YouTube videos of the radio show. If you want to read my articles, then I would encourage you to go to activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, and theantimedia.org. You can find those articles there. A number of other websites repost my articles. The Progressive Gazette is reposting my articles there as well. So you can check that out, and I think I've been reposted a few times by David Icke, and I think a couple of weeks ago InfoWars reposted one of the articles. So the articles are getting shared quite a bit, and I think a lot of people are coming to find out, particularly in the questions of the Middle East, the questions of ISIS, and now with the European immigration crisis, which we'll have something to talk about with that tonight. I think a lot of people may be seeking out sources of information that, told them that this was going to happen 3 years ago, as opposed to just 3 minutes ago. So encouraging people to continue to share those articles around. Now, if you're interested in my work specifically, then I would highly encourage you to go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and that is the website where I repost all of the articles, all of the YouTube videos, all the interviews, all of the archive versions of this show. And, of course, you'll find a books tab there as well. You can click on that tab. They'll take you to the bookstore. You can purchase one of the 6 books that I have authored. There's a link to the radio show there as well. There's a bio section, a contact section, and an events section where I will be making appearances in the future if I do that, and I probably will be. Now, a word about the website. We've got a few announcements to make. A word about the website is that we have made some additions to the website, and this is not where we intend to be ultimately. We intend to improve the website even further, but this is just a step in the right direction here. On the website, if you go to BrandonTurbeville.com, you'll see that we have included a translation tool. So if you're in a foreign country and if you want to send the web page to someone in China, for instance, you could send them the web page without having to have an actual internet Chinese website in Chinese, translated directly in Chinese. You could send them the website and they can use the translation tool. Just click on the top right hand corner of the page and pick Chinese as their language, and it automatically translates the entire page to Chinese. And virtually every language in the world is included in this tool. So we have already seen an increase in interest from the international dimension here, and there's another reason for that, and I'll explain that shortly. We've also added a tool so you can subscribe to the posts. You can do all kinds of things like that. You can get the RSS feed. We've embedded the Twitter feed there on the web page, and we've also added a section of recommended websites with links to the websites. We've added Twitter feeds by a number of very important and reputable members of the alternative media here. Mimi Olham, Alan Watt, of course, Tony Cartolucci. His Twitter feed is there, as well as a number of others, Natural Blaze, Activist Post, and you'll also see the RSS feed, which has the links to the posts on the website, the more recent posts on the website of Land Destroyer, Natural Blaze, Activist Post, Tarpley.net. UCY is there as well, Syrian Perspective, and we're going to be adding more on the homepage there, just to give you more reason to go to the website and check out the work that I've posted up there, but also to check out the work that other people have posted. You have a reason to stay on the site and use the site as sort of a central hub for good information regarding a number of different issues. And again, as I said, we're going to add more stuff to this, what we've already got there, but we're also going to continue to improve the site, and this is only one step in that direction. So please go check out the new improvements, BrandonTurbeville.com, and be reassured that there are more to come. Now, a new announcement is that the book which I announced last week, we are releasing a new book about Hillary Clinton, and this is going to be timed just before the primaries. Well, not just before, significantly before the primaries. And it is about 350 or so odd pages worth of information, basically detailing why Hillary Clinton should never be president. Now, as I said earlier or last week, that the question of picking Democrats over Republicans, or picking which Democrats or which Republicans over the other, is really sort of a fruitless question, because we all know that our presidents are selected. We all know that there's very little difference between any one of these candidates. But we also have to be somewhat realistic here and realize that there are worst-case scenarios. And when we look at this competitive political race, we can see on the Republican side there's still a lot of jockeying for the leader role, the individual who's leading the poll numbers. It seems to be Trump now, but this could change. There's 16 of them now, with Rick Perry dropping out of the race. With the Democrats, it's clearly Hillary Clinton, although Bernie Sanders is now apparently the front runner. We all know that Hillary Clinton is waiting for that crown to be put on her head, and we all know that the Clintons will stop at nothing to do that. So be prepared to see some funny tricks here in the near future. But the worst case scenario, Hillary Clinton is the worst case scenario, and this is not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders. This is not an endorsement of any Republican. This is, in fact, we will be sitting this one out, but we will not be allowing Hillary Clinton to get a free ride into the White House, because worst case scenarios should always be avoided. And that's what the purpose of this book is trying to accomplish, is that we're trying to get this information out there to people. This is stuff that is not, I wouldn't call them new revelations necessarily, stuff that's already been out there. But the fact is, when I put this book together, it was an idea to do it quickly, to get it out before the primaries, and to just basically list all of the reasons that Hillary Clinton should not be allowed to be president. But I quickly realized that if I was going to list all the reasons Hillary Clinton would not be allowed to be president, she'd be well into her second term by the time I finished the book. And so I was unable to do that, but we listed a number of them, quite a few of them, as I mentioned. It's 350 pages. Before I had to stop it, I had to leave some things out. So you should see why this is the possibly worst case scenario there. But the book will be released in the next couple of weeks. We are just going through the last little bit of finishing touches, and when I have a release date, I will mention that to you here on this show with much fanfare, and I will release a hard copy book that, of course, you'll be able to purchase through the website or online. We hope to have the books on Amazon in the near future. And we will be releasing an ebook, and the ebook is, as far as my knowledge, we're going to have to work on the details of this, but the ebook will probably be free of charge just to get this out, and we'll give you more details on that. All right, one last announcement before we actually get down to the details of what we're talking about here. I've wasted enough time with this self-promotion, but we have a website also, Brandon Turbeville Russia.blogspot.com. There's a lot of Russian readers of my articles coming to BrandonTurbeville.com, and I mean a lot of them. So we decided that we would open up a parallel blog, parallel web page. It's free, BrandonTurbeville.blogspot.com. I'm sorry, Brandon Russia.blogspot.com. And this is the website. It's a lot of it's in Russian, but with the new translation tool, it kind of negated the need to really do that. But it's there, and they can translate it into Russian. The instructions are at the top of the page to translate the page into Russian, so we hope a lot of the Russian readers take advantage of that page. So if you have any friends in Russia, or if you're in Russia and listening to this show, you can also go to BrandonTurbevilleRussia.blogspot.com and check all that stuff out. And of course, it's not updated to the September 12th article, which was the newest article on BrandonTurbeville.com, but we are getting things put up there as soon as possible. So over the next couple of days, it should be all up to date and everything be it's basically a mirror website to BrandonTurbeville.com. Now, let's talk about issues, some real important issues. The foreign policy situation here in the United States is worsening and worsening some more. We have the Russians, as I mentioned last week, announcing that they were sending a number of troops, military equipment, including MiG-31s, and, of course, some anti-air missile defense systems. They've also sent in advisors and troops to train and help the Syrian soldiers operate those missile systems and those military pieces of equipment. The Russians are denying that there's regular troops operating on the ground in a battle capacity. The Syrians are remaining largely silent about it, but the Lebanese media is going crazy, saying that the Russians are indeed fighting ISIS terrorists on the ground in a direct manner. Now, of course, we've got the Americans and NATO bombing Iraq and Syria whenever they please, largely bombing Syrian and Iraqi infrastructure or bombing targets that the Syrian government is about to overtake. And we've got the Turks bombing the Kurds in the northern part of the country. We've got the Israelis bombing, well, whatever they want, whenever they want, ready to fight and die to the last American, always acting as Al-Qaeda's air force. Al-Qaeda never seems to attack Israel, as we've mentioned before. But we've got all of these different actors bombing in and around Syria and closing in on the Syrian forces. And we've also got this safe zone, this ISIL-free zone in the northern part of Turkey, which is an obvious attempt to keep the supply lines of ISIS open, and that we've discussed that before. But now we've got the Russians, and the Russians are going to be flying combat missions above Syria. They are going to be bombing ISIS in Syria. And as I mentioned last week, this is a potentially very dangerous situation here. This gives us the possibility that Russian jets will be colliding, whether it's in direct collision or whether it's in actual military battles, firing missiles, machine guns, etc., with NATO jets. Whether we will see a confrontation between Russian air forces and NATO air forces, or Israeli air forces. Might as well be NATO. And that's a real concern. The question here would be, what would happen since we have this situation where American bombers are flying around all over Syria and Russian bombers will now be bombing ISIS targets. If a Russian bomber goes in to bomb an ISIS target and the American Air Force pilot just confuses the behavior of the Russian jet and fires on the Russian jet, how would the Russians respond? What if the same situation happens with a Russian pilot? Sees the Americans as inherently erratic and they don't know if they're about to be fired on and they fire upon an American jet? What if the anti-aircraft missiles get fired at an American jet that are bombing the Syrian forces by mistake, of course? What will be the response? What if the Russian planes decide to bomb ISIS as it exists in the ISIL-free zone? What happens then if the Russians actually try to bomb ISIS, if they actually try to cut off the supply route and go into that 60-mile swath of territory, and they actually bomb ISIS supply routes, and the Americans say, no, you can't bomb here because this is our ISIS pets, and we have to keep these supply lines open, so they force the Russians out in a military fashion. What would be the response to that? Well, what would happen if the Israelis decide to bomb the Assad regime and the Russians decide not to allow them to do so? What would happen if the Israelis bomb a Russian jet, again acting as the erratic madman of the Middle East, knowing that the Americans will be there to sacrifice men and women in the service of the Israelis? What would happen? That's the big question. What would happen if any of these things took place? Now, we had on 9/11 this year, we had the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stating that the United States should engage in bilateral military-to-military communication with Russia over military operations in Syria in order to avoid, quote, unintended incidents. Now, he didn't spell out exactly what he meant by unintended incidents, but it was clear, right? We all know what unintended incidents mean. Right? It's a direct military confrontation between the United States and NATO forces and Russian forces. And this is what Lavrov had to say. He said, "We are always in favor of military people talking to each other in a professional way. They understand each other very well. If, as John Kerry has said many times, the United States wants those channels frozen, then be our guest," end quote. So the mainstream press here in the United States, of course, and what little coverage it was given of it, pounced all over that statement like it was a veiled threat to the U.S. But Lavrov had made his statement in the course of really explaining the importance of military-to-military communication so they could avoid these types of incidents in the course of their simultaneous operations on the same field. In other words, it wasn't a threat, but it was clearly a cautionary warning. But what's important here is that Lavrov's words really addressed a very real possibility of direct military confrontation between Russian and American forces in the skies or on the ground in Syria. So that is something to pay attention to. Again, the Western press here really seized upon his statements as provocative, but let's look at ISIS czar General John Allen, who's gone much further in terms of hinting at the potential for a real fight to break out between the U.S. and Russia over Syria. Allen was in an interview with Jake Tapper of CNN, and this is sort of a cupcake interview where they have this fawning worship of the military man where they just, oh, you're so great, we know nothing about what you do, and just tell us what goes through such a brilliant mind kind of interview. And he was asked about the recent Russian involvement in Syria, and the transcript of that goes like this, so forgive me for making this choppy. So the question is, the Russian Foreign Ministry just finally acknowledged that they do have some personnel in Syria aiding Bashar al-Assad's regime in its fight against ISIS. Do you have a problem with Russian forces in Syria on Assad's side but fighting ISIS? And General Allen says, we've been watching this closely over the last several days, watching the build-up to see what it might mean. So Tapper says, so we don't know whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. And General Allen, well, I think it's a bad thing. Tapper says, okay. General Allen said, if the Russians use combat forces to prop up the regime of Bashar al-Assad. So it's a bad thing if the Russians use combat forces to prop up the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Tapper says, okay. General Allen continues. He says, Bashar al-Assad is singularly responsible for the death of tens of thousands of his people. Now, you can hear me vomiting profusely whenever I have to repeat that statement, but still, it's Allen's words. Bashar al-Assad is singularly responsible for the death of tens of thousands of his people. Much of the instability in the region is a direct result of the actions of Bashar al-Assad, and to prop him up with military force creates an additional crisis in the region, and in fact, could bring Russian forces in confrontation with coalition forces that are fighting Daesh in Syria. So, that's in quote. So, these absurd and ridiculous claims that fighting in the Middle East is the fault of Assad, it's really attributable to the United States and NATO and the GCC and Israel and people like Allen, and specifically Allen. He's also stating that the Russian involvement in Syria could bring a confrontation between Russian and coalition forces. So that's, his rhetoric is not only disingenuous, it's incredibly dangerous. It's also largely unreported in the media because this was a fawning interview that we're all just supposed to see and worship Allen. So if this type of confrontation does result, I hope the listeners to this show at least will be able to remember that it's not the Syrian government and it's not the Russian government that would be ultimately responsible for this. It's the United States, it's Israel, it's Turkey, it's NATO. They're the ones that have trained these terrorists. They're the ones that have directed them, that armed them, that supported them, that controlled them. They're the one that did all of this coordination with terrorists in Syria. They're the ones that have been bombing in support of these terrorists. And they are the ones who are responsible for any fallout from terrorist attacks that come as a result of these groups, for the terrorist attacks, waves of terrorist attacks that very well may take place in Europe in the coming years, and the United States. And they're responsible for any confrontation that takes place between Russian and American forces in Syria. They started it. They're in the wrong. It's not the Russians. It's the United States. And it's time the American people get off their high horse and realize this fact, that the United States is acting as the greatest force for evil in this world today, or at least one of the greatest forces. Our competition, though, would come from Europe, if anybody. So, that's what's happening in terms of the Russian forces in Syria. Now, I want to take a quick break to mention, let's stay on the Russian topic for just a second, because I want to have some continuity here, and I do want to get into the immigration issue if I can. We have this situation with Sweden now. Back on we have another geopolitical storm brewing. Back on Thursday, we had Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova stating that, quote, Swedish membership in NATO would have political, military, and foreign policy consequences and would require retaliatory measures from Russia. She also said defense and national security strategy is up to each sovereign state to decide. However, we still consider Sweden's policy of non-participation in military blocs to be an important factor for the stability of Northern Europe. End quote. And what this is surrounding is that Sweden, who has not been a member of NATO, is now preparing to join. Formally join NATO, and that the Russians obviously oppose that. We've had a number of different media outlets over the last year reporting this, and it appears to be 100% accurate that Sweden is considering membership in NATO. Back in June 2015, the Russian ambassador to Sweden, Viktor Torrentsev, stated that if Sweden decided to join NATO, that it might actually provoke a military response from Russia. That's what he says. I don't think it will become relevant in the near future, even though there has been a certain swing in public opinion. But if it happens, there will be countermeasures. Putin pointed out that there will be consequences, that Russia will have to resort to a response of a military kind and reorient our troops and missiles. The country that joins NATO needs to be aware of the risks it is exposing itself to. Now, Tartarintsev did not point out that Sweden, he did point out that Sweden was not a target for Russian military forces, but it was clearly a warning, again, to Sweden when it is just trying to decide whether or not it wants to become a NATO member formally. Now, the question, let's clear up that statement as well. It didn't mean that he was going to invade. Putin didn't say, if you join NATO, we're going to invade. This is not, American foreign policy here. But he did essentially hint that if Sweden joins NATO, that Russia will have to look at its military capabilities where the forces are aligned, and if it sees a threat from that, it may have to reorient its missiles to adjust for the threat. Well, what do you expect them to do? That's the only rational thing for them to do, as opposed to just ignoring it. Now, believe it or not, it wasn't Tartarintsev's hinting that there would be a military response from Russia that got so much public attention. It was Zakharova's words that really got everybody upset. In fact, on Friday, September 11th, the Swedish Foreign Ministry called Tartarintsev in to elaborate and explain on her recent statements in regard to the potential membership in NATO. Now, the Swedish government has been increasingly acting hostile towards Russia over the last several months. They've been expressing greater and greater solidarity with Western nations who are intent on destroying, three of Russia's allies or neighbors. In April of this year, we also had defense ministers from Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Iceland. They all joined together to express solidarity against Russian aggression in a joint statement. So that's one of those things. Their statement said, Russia's leaders have shown that they are prepared to make practical and effective use of military means in order to reach their political goals, even when this involves violating principles of international law. And the rest of the world busts out in rapturous laughter because of the hypocrisy to claim that another country who's invaded no one in modern recent times, I guess we should say, in the last few years, has invaded no one, is getting condemnation from countries who have been invading for the last 15 or more, actually, maybe the last 20, 25. Maybe it goes back that far. Further than that, to be honest. Well, let's not get into that contest. But it's total hypocrisy, right? Using practical and effective use of military means in order to reach political goals. God, who are we talking about? Are we talking about Russia, or are we talking about NATO and the United States? Even when this involves violating principles of international law, or they're really talking about Russia? You sure this isn't NATO, the United States? Oh, well. All right, Sweden, back to Sweden. They've been cooperating with NATO openly for some time, right? They've been going back at least to 1994 when it joined NATO's Partnership for Peace program. And the stated purpose of the PFPP is to provide greater trust between NATO and other countries in Europe. That's not such a huge deal, I guess, because I think the Russians are even a part of the Partnership for Peace program. But in terms of direct military cooperation, Sweden has committed forces right there with NATO's military personnel in recent years. Sweden has its own military deployed with the International Security Assistance Forces in Afghanistan, NATO forces, since 2006. And in 2011, Sweden was right there with NATO in Libya, bombing and destroying those people's homes and living standards and killing their families, and then murdering Gaddafi to turn the place into a basket case for baboons and Islamic fundamentalist monkeys running around, slaughtering people left and right, cutting off heads, and imposing pre-civilization on all the people who live in Libya. Remember of course, engaging in massacres of black Libyans for no other reason than the color of their skin. But that was not, I never heard Black Lives Matter comment on that, because that apparently only some Black Lives Matter, right? But, whatever. Well, let's move on to the next topic here. I want to get in before we move to the immigration crisis, because that is what everyone is talking about right now. But I want to mention this Julian Assange, and we are not going to go into too much detail about what we think about Julian Assange right now, but he has revealed in his new book, The WikiLeaks Files, he has confirmed what I have been telling you for years, and other researchers, Tony Cartolucci, Webster Tarpley, Ziad Fadel, Eric Draitser, Mimi Allaham. I mean, it goes on and on. The individuals here in the alternative media that have been telling you that this Western plan to destroy Syria has gone back much further than even 2011, when this first really began. So this book that Assange is releasing, it's called The WikiLeaks Files, and he is revealing that not only was there a coordinated Western attempt to destabilize and then ultimately destroy Syria and the government of Assad, but that attempt was devised way earlier than 2011, when these so-called Arab Spring color revolution protests began in earnest. In his book, Assange revealed that the Syrian destabilization plan goes back as far as 2006. And he says that there was a 2006 diplomatic cable from the U.S. ambassador to Syria, William Roebuck, where Roebuck discussed the plans to create a situation where the Syrian government would be enticed to overreact to false or manufactured threats posed by radical jihadists crossing back and forth between Iraq and Syria. The plan basically would have been that radical jihadists would have been coming back and forth between Iraq and Syria's borders and committing some types of terrorist attacks, right? And the plan would have portrayed the Syrian government as weak in the eyes of the Syrian people, and presumably that would have encouraged protest and social unrest. And at the same time, it would have caused the Assad government to crack down and jump the gun on its reaction to what it perceived as a threat, the jihadists. So they'd go in and they'd crack down and react with an iron fist, but at the same time they would look weak in doing so, and that would promote protests. So this is what Assange had to say. He did this in an interview with Going Underground, and this is what he said, quote, "That plan was to use a number of different factors to create paranoia within the Syrian government, to push it to overreact, to make it fear there's a coup. So in theory it says, we have a problem with Islamic State extremists crossing over the border with Iraq, and we're taking actions against them to take this information and make the Syrian government look weak, the fact that it is dealing with Islamic extremists at all." He also goes on, he says, part of the Western plan was to foster tensions between Shiites and Sunnis, in particular to take rumors that are known to be false or exaggerations and promote them. That Iran is trying to convert poor Sunnis and to work with Saudis and Egypt to foster that perception in order to make it harder for Iran to have influence, and also harder for the government to have influence in the population. Now, as we've talked about a number of times, we have back in the same year, the redirection, well, maybe 2007, the redirection by Seymour Hersh, written for the New Yorker magazine. What does he say? 2007. There's a plan to undermine Iran, which is predominantly Shiite. The Bush administration has decided, in effect, to reconfigure its priorities in the Middle East. In Lebanon, the administration has cooperated with Saudi Arabia's government, which is Sunni, in clandestine operations that are intended to weaken Hezbollah, the Shiite organization that is backed by Iran. The U.S. has also taken part in clandestine operations aimed at Iran and its ally Syria. A byproduct of these activities has been the bolstering of Sunni extremist groups that espouse a militant vision of Islam and are hostile to America and sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. We also have an article coming out in 2005, and this is somewhat less talked about in the alternative media. I don't know why, but it's by Michael Hirsch and John Barry of Newsweek, and it's entitled The Salvador Option, 2005, even before Assange's cables. And it says, quote, following that model, one Pentagon proposal would send special forces teams to advise, support, and possibly train Iraqi squads, most likely hand-picked Kurdish Peshmerga fighters and Shiite militiamen to target Sunni insurgents and their sympathizers even across the border into Syria, according to military insiders familiar with the discussions. It remains unclear, however, whether this would be a policy of assassination or so-called snatch operations in which the targets are sent to secret facilities for interrogation. The current thinking is that while U.S. Special Forces would lead operations in, say, Syria, activities inside Iraq itself would be carried out by Iraqi paramilitaries, officials tell Newsweek. Now, the plan detailed by Hirsch and Barry is different from the one detailed by Seymour Hersh. It's also different from the one revealed by Assange in the cables. But the basic theme and the ultimate goal are very similar and in some respects identical. Basically, it's to use radicalized sectarian fighters inside Syria for the purpose of destabilizing and destroying the government of Assad. In one case, it's Sunni militants, and that's the plan that apparently they went along with. And in the other plan, it was to use Shiite fighters, Kurdish fighters, to do this. But regardless, the plan was to use sectarianism and use them to destroy the Syrian government. So, again, anybody who blames American foreign policy failure for the success of ISIS all across Iraq and Syria, that is only serving to obfuscate and cover up the true nature of terrorism as well as its historical and recent roots. Right? If you're arguing blowback, if you're arguing that we don't know what to do in terms of this this foreign policy situation, everything we try doesn't work out, well then you're part of the problem, because there's a simple solution to this. It doesn't require reinvading Iraq. It does not involve invading Syria. It certainly does not include arming these damn savages in Iraq and Syria that are going around raping their way across the country. It does not involve asking the Saudis to come in and play a bigger role, and certainly not the Israelis. It simply involves not funding terrorism. You want to stop terrorism, you stop funding it, for one thing. You stop directing it and giving it guns and telling it where to go and opening up borders and putting it in strategic locations. That's what you stop doing if you want to stop terrorism. Clearly, the United States doesn't want to stop terrorism. That should be simple enough. You want to stop terrorism, stop the supply lines at the Turkish border, and it will take care of itself. Or better yet, the Assad government, Hezbollah, and Iran will take care of it in very short order, because they're not the supermen that the U.S. media claims they are. ISIS is not a bunch of supermen. They're a bunch of savages and morons. A lot of them are basically retarded. They would not be able to stand up to the Syrian military unless they were backed by intelligence, by training, by weapons being shipped in, and by U.S. NATO special forces. So that is the solution to that issue. Now, the European immigration crisis, which has got everybody talking. Well, let's take a look at this. Okay, this is important because there is some complex issues here, and we're going to try to address them. Now, everybody has seen thousands and thousands and thousands of immigrants, washing up on the shores of Europe, coming through Turkey, a couple of other places, seeking asylum. And this has brought tension between the governments, the European governments, and the immigrants, of course, and it's brought tension between European governments and each other, between citizens and the immigrants, and between citizens and citizens. So it's causing a lot of social tension here. Now, the immigration crisis has not formed organically. It is not formed in a vacuum. the people who are attempting to enter Europe over the last few weeks they're a diverse lot, but the overwhelming majority of them are fleeing countries where the West, the United States, and NATO have brought their peace and democracy in the last few years via bombs or troops or proxy terrorists. In other words, the migrant crisis was created entirely by the West. In the countries where they haven't bombed or slaughtered or sent in democracy-loving troops or savages to go in and spread their form of Sharia, we've seen the IMF-style democracy and privatization and austerity. In other words, economic terrorism. So a lot of these issues that these migrants have faced in their home countries are the fault of the West. Not entirely in some of them, but most of the areas where these people are fleeing are generally coming out of areas that have been damaged in some way, either directly, militarily, bombing, slaughtering, terrorism, troops, etc., from the West. But we also see this picture of this little boy who drowned. His family was trying to leave Syria and come to Europe. He drowned. His body washed up on the shores of Turkey. And that picture, with his body on the shore, has been shown all over the media. And it's interesting because, the West has been so absolutely uncaring regarding the Syrian people, who they've been destroying with their exceptional militaries. All of a sudden, the photos of a dead Syrian boy have been all over the media, and it's been pulling on the heartstrings of the American public, who, when it comes to most Syrians, they generally don't have any heart at all. But some reason, this little boy is tugged at the heartstrings, because they're told it should tug at their heartstrings by the media. Now, the little boy who drowned, this is, his family was trying to escape, the American democracy of beheadings and rapes and chants of Allahu Akbar, funded by NATO. This is a tragedy. This little boy is a tragedy, and you can't argue that any other way. It's a tragedy. But it's also an example of Western hypocrisy and duplicity, because while the world was focused on this one dead little boy washing up on the shores of Turkey, they didn't say anything at all about the little girl, the same age as the boy in the photo, who was killed by a car bomb in Latakia at about the same time. She was a victim of America's moderate rebels who've beheaded and raped their way across Syria. She died a violent death. But the media was completely silent regarding her case and the cases of hundreds of thousands of people and thousands of children killed by Western-backed terrorists operating in Syria. Only the case of the boy on the beach, that was the only case where the media has become indignant about the death of a Syrian person, Syrian child. Now, the media wanted to blame the death of the little boy and his family, in fact, the death of all of the Syrian refugees, on Bashar al-Assad and his supposed cruelty and barrel bombs, and even terrorism is what they're accusing him of. If you were to listen to the Western media, it would appear that not one single civilian has ever died at the hands of the moderate cannibals. It's all the fault of Assad. But the Syrian destabilization, of course, that was initiated by the West, and Assad's done nothing but defend his people and his country in the face of an Anglo-American assault. Assad is widely popular in Syria. Who's not popular in Syria? It's the American death squads and terrorists who are eating Syrian soldiers and then buying little Syrian girls as sex slaves. That is a product of the United States and Saudi Arabia. So, with all of this, it's important to ask yourself, if the Syrian refugees were escaping Syria because of Assad's cruelty, let's give them that benefit of the doubt. Let's give CNN and Fox and National Pentagon Radio the benefit of the doubt and say they're trying to escape Assad's cruelty. Why in the hell didn't they do that in 2008? Why didn't they do it in 2009? Why didn't they do it in 2010? Why haven't we seen a mass exodus of Syrian refugees because of the cruel, awful, terrible Assad until now? Why all of a sudden? Well, the answer is simple. It's because the Syrian refugees are fleeing savages, terrorists, Western bombs, not Assad. And ISIS forces, of course, are closing in on government strongholds like Latakia. And a lot of the refugees in Syria, the eastern parts of Syria, southern parts, northern parts, have flooded into places like Latakia, government-controlled areas. They ran to government-controlled areas to get away from the democracy of the West. And now with ISIS forces closing in on these Latakia areas, they are kind of being pushed out. And a lot of the refugees, of course, had fled to Turkey, which, by the way, if anybody's concerned about drowned Syrian refugees, you can blame that directly on Turkey, because there is a land route to Europe from Turkey. You could just walk across Turkey, get into Europe, but Turkey won't allow them to do it. It forces them to go across the water. It forces them to get in boats and go across the water. That is one of the reasons that they're drowning, is because of the Turks. But we see interviews, and I've linked to a couple of these. Well, maybe not this one, but this is the Eretz channel. I was unable to link to this in my interview, and it's going to be hard to find. But there was an interview conducted by, it was Turkish television, and that's the Eretz channel. You can probably find it if you do a lot of research. And they did interviews with a number of Syrian refugees, and the refugees revealed the fact that the overwhelming majority of Syrians don't fear Assad. They fear the savages. They fear ISIS. They fear Jabhat al-Nusra and the Free Syrian Army. To give you an example, interviewer, question. In Turkey, they say that Assad's army is oppressing you and destroying your homes. Is this true? The refugee. No, no, no. This is completely wrong. The Syrian army rescued me. We have another refugee that interjects. We used to live in extreme security, thank God. Refugee number 3 jumps in and says, the world must see what is happening in Syria. If it gets destroyed, it will get rebuilt, whether it's at the level of the leadership or the people. Anyone that says there's a free Syrian army, I tell them no, there is terrorism. The terrorism is done via external conspiracy with external financing. But we are alive, we are returning, we are returning, we are returning. So demonstrating in one statement that the Syrian people do not want these damn rebels, and also demonstrating that someone who hasn't had electricity or adequate food for months and then survived a perilous sea journey to Europe still has more of a clue about international relations, geopolitics, and the business of the United States than virtually almost all American citizens today, and that is a very big shame on this country. But the Syrian refugee situation, again, was entirely created by the West from the beginning of the crisis right up until the present. It's precisely the United States and NATO and Israel that have the blood of these children on their hands. That includes Turkey specifically as well. If it were not for the meddling and aggression of these countries, both the drowned boy and the dead Syrian girl would still be alive today. So that blood is on the hands of the United States, NATO, the GCC, and Israel. And an honorable mention to Turkey as well. So we should bear that in mind. All right, we're running out of time. I need to get to this. Now, we got to ask, is Turkey pushing Syrian refugees into Europe? And I think the answer is yes. We have to note that the influx of Syrian refugees into Europe, beginning now, all of a sudden, in such massive numbers, and then taking place simultaneously with immigrants coming from other countries, that's important to point out. The majority of these immigrants are not from Syria. They're from Africa. Take a look. They're coming from other locations in the Middle East, but they're also coming from a lot of places in North Africa. So this is not only the result of this pressure valve breaking from a result of ISIS pushing west to government-held territory in Syria, but it's deliberate action by Turkey. And I'm not just talking about pushing them over the water. There has been a coordinated plan. There's an article entitled Refugee Flow Linked to Turkish Policy Shift that was published in Greece, the Greek paper, Kathimerini paper, And this is what the article says. It says, a sharp increase in the influx of migrants and refugees, mostly from Syria, into Greece, is due in part to a shift in Turkey's geopolitical tactics, according to diplomatic sources. These officials linked the wave of migrants into the eastern Aegean to political pressures in neighboring Turkey, which is bracing for snap elections in November, and to a recent decision by Ankara to join the U.S. in bombing Islamic State targets in Syria. The analyses of several officials indicate that the influx from neighboring Turkey is taking place as Turkish officials look the other way or actively promote the exodus. In other words, they're helping push them in. But now, we've got to ask, what is the goal? Why is all of this happening? What is happening with the immigration crisis there in Europe? Why is this happening? Well, why has the media, for instance, focused on the drowned Syrian boy? Why haven't we seen this image floating around all forms of, why have we seen this media image floating all around over the last few weeks? It's not because of the concern held by the West for Syrians or Syrian children. Clearly, they've killed plenty of them. That should go without saying. An even bigger question, I think, is why the sudden influx of immigrants and refugees into Europe now? And the answer is twofold. First, the ability of Assad to hold out for as long as he has in the face of this Anglo-American onslaught, the need for greater use of Western military power in addition to terrorist proxies has become apparent, right? The longer he's been able to hold out, the greater the need for Western military intervention and greater support for these terrorist proxies has become clear. The creation of a safe zone in Syria by the United States and Turkey, that was one major step toward greater direct military involvement in Syria and basically implementing Libya 2.0 there. The Russian announcement of an expeditionary force in Syria and the upcoming vote on the Iranian nuclear deal in the U.S. Congress, that has created the need to accelerate the attack on Syria before the Russians become too entrenched and before Iranian money and supplies can flow even freer to the Syrian army. So that's why we have the new debate as to whether or not certain European countries should engage in greater bombing in Syria, or this time openly stating that Assad and Syrian forces will be the target, in addition to that phony claim that ISIS will be the main target. Clearly it's Assad. Now, the Western media is awash with reports that the British are seriously considering bombing ISIS in Syria, but the discussion in England revolves around the bombing of ISIS. The true nature of that discussion revolves around the question of whether or not to engage in the creation of safe havens and the bombing of Assad forces. Now, just we got to move on here, but because I want to get to the more important stuff. David Cameron is discussing bombing. We have former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, stating that he backs military intervention to create safe enclaves where the country in Syria, where the civilians would be protected. Oh, please spare me. And that he wanted to deal with the evil regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, as well as the militant jihadis. Yeah, sure. So that's Lord Carey. All right, but we see that the influx of refugees into Europe is being used to frighten the European public with images of Muslim fanatics, with hordes of people chanting Allahu Akbar and fuck you into supporting a bombing campaign against the Syrian government. And they are doing that. There are hordes of people chanting Allahu Akbar now in Europe, in the Syrian, some of the allegedly Syrian refugees. You can see that they are, there's some groups that are nothing but men. And you're going to tell me that the refugees they should contain more women and children than anything. But there are some all-male groups, and they're chanting Allahu Akbar and fuck you on the streets. So, and the European public now, they've been witnessing their countries being destroyed under waves of immigration for years, right? They've seen their cultures destroyed. They've seen their countries destroyed with immigration, and they're now being confronted with physical violence of dislocations of themselves as well as the immigrants. And with this push, the people are likely to just simply throw up their hands in frustration and accept the bombing campaign as a solution. They'll just simply say, do whatever you have to do to stop ISIS and Assad. Just get these people out of here. Europe can't handle any more immigration. It's got to stop. we've got waves of immigrants now arriving from a war-torn country. We've got fresh images of drowned children, thirsty adults, general misery. That's going to be used by the responsibility to protect humanitarian bomber crowds of the left liberal variety who are only anti-war when a Republican does it, but in the governmental structure are not even anti-war when a Republican does it. It's only for humanitarian reasons. It's how it's sold. So they're going to bring that second half of this political dichotomy on board with a bombing campaign, while right-wing conservatives were, they'd never seen a war they didn't like. Now, the second answer to this question is the wave of immigration is also designed to destroy European culture. They bring in people with diverse and opposing cultures, and they can use that to create an easy divide and conquer strategy in order to break the European people using the already broken immigrant population, right? So Europe has been overwhelmed with massive waves of immigration from the Middle East and African nations, as well as other third world countries, even before the Syrian crisis. Now we've got this under a number of guises, right? Whether it's economic, ethical, the ruling class has opened up floodgates to immigrations from countries whose culture is vastly different from that of the host country, and where the majority of citizens of European countries are themselves struggling to make ends meet. The influx of immigrants has only worsened the economic situation of the European countries who've taken them in. It's created an underclass of low-wage, low-skill workers who are then played off against the indigenous Europeans. Anger at second-class status is directed at Europeans from immigrants. Anger at the lowering of wages and living standards are directing at immigrants from Europeans. Neither group ever understands, by the way, that it's the oligarchical elements of their societies that have created these types of conditions at home and abroad, but they just turn their pent-up anger on one another. So, that being said, they can't handle any more immigration. The problem is there seems to be a concerted effort to recruit more fundamentalist elements of these people in foreign societies for relocation in Europe. In Syria, in Iraq, and these African nations, there seems to be a concerted effort to make it easier for people who are fundamentalist, jihadist in nature, hard-nosed Islamic fanatic, and they are getting priority. I've got sources in Syria that are reporting this to me, as well as other reports, saying that they're being given greater attention and assistance in making their way to Europe. That's going to cause greater social tension, and it's going to lead to the possibility of greater potential terror attacks directed by intelligence agencies and carried out by these idiots. Now, quickly, we're running out of time. The solutions. Immigration, it cannot continue. They cannot be allowed into Europe. But you want to end the Syrians don't want to be in Europe. They want to be in Syria. So the answer to the situation is to end the war in Syria. Stop the bombing. Stop funding ISIS. Stop allowing ISIS across the borders. Talk with the Assad government one-on-one. Assist the Assad government in any way possible to fight ISIS, and then engage in some type of international investment rebuilding facility where it could provide jobs here in the U.S. producing the materials to help Syria rebuild. We're going to talk more about this immigration issue because we're going to go into detail with it hopefully next week. But ladies and gentlemen, tonight has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.